Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The call that changed everything. What if the thing you thought defined you, your job, your career, your identity, was suddenly ripped away in a single phone call? What if the life you'd carefully built over years collapsed in 30 seconds, leaving you staring at a future you never imagined? That was me, standing in my kitchen in Chicago on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, holding my phone, listening to words that didn't seem real. "I'm so sorry," my boss said, her voice flat and professional. "We have to let you go. The company is restructuring. Your position has been eliminated." I remember the way the rain sounded against the window, the way my hands started shaking, the way I couldn't find my voice to respond. I had been working at that marketing firm for 7 years. 7 years of late nights, early mornings, sacrificed weekends. 7 years of building a career I was proud of. And now, in less than a minute, it was gone. Just like that. I was 42 years old, single, and suddenly unemployed in a country that didn't feel like home. The weeks that followed were a blur of shock and denial. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I spent hours staring at my laptop, refreshing job boards, sending out applications that felt like throwing messages in bottles into an endless ocean. Every rejection email felt like a personal failure. Every interview that went nowhere felt like confirmation that I wasn't good enough. I had always defined myself by my work. I was the career woman, the one who had it together, the one who didn't need anyone. And now, without that identity, I didn't know who I was. I felt like a ghost in my own life, drifting through days that had no purpose, no structure, no meaning. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I had never noticed how empty it was. I had never noticed how alone I was. Psychologists talk about something called identity foreclosure, when you become so attached to one role that you lose touch with the other parts of yourself. I had done that. I had poured everything into my career, believing that success would fill the emptiness I felt inside. But when that success was taken away, the emptiness was still there. Even bigger. Even louder. Even more terrifying. I started to realize that I had been using work as a distraction from my loneliness. As long as I was busy, I didn't have to think about the fact that I was alone. As long as I was achieving, I didn't have to feel the ache of coming home to an empty apartment every night. But now, without work, the loneliness was impossible to ignore. I remember sitting on my couch one evening, watching the sun set through the window, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. It was a strange, unexpected feeling. Because even though I was terrified of not finding a job, of running out of money, of being seen as a failure, there was also a strange relief. I no longer had to pretend. I no longer had to perform. I could just be. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would stop running from my loneliness. I would stop using work as a shield. I would face the emptiness I'd been avoiding for so long. And maybe, just maybe, I would find something on the other side of it. Something I never expected. Something that would change everything. The first week of nothing. What happens when the structure of your life collapses and you're left with nothing but empty hours and a silence that screams louder than any alarm clock? What do you do when the thing that got you out of bed every morning is suddenly gone, and there's no reason to get up anymore? That was my first week of unemployment. I woke up on Monday at 6:30, the same time I'd woken up for 7 years, and I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something to happen. But nothing happened. No emails. No meetings. No deadlines. No purpose. Just the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of the city outside my window. I stayed in bed until 11, not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what else to do. The day stretched ahead of me like an endless, empty desert. And I was lost in it. The days blurred together. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they all felt the same. I'd drag myself out of bed, make coffee I didn't drink, and sit on the couch scrolling through job postings that all seemed to say the same thing. You're not qualified enough. You're too old. You're not what we're looking for. Every rejection email was a knife. Every silence from an application was a confirmation of my worst fears. I started to question everything. Was I ever really good at my job? Or was I just pretending? Did anyone actually value me, or was I just filling a seat? The voice in my head grew louder and more vicious. It told me I was a failure. It told me I'd never find another job. It told me I'd end up alone and broke and forgotten. And I started to believe it. Psychologists call this catastrophizing, the tendency to imagine the worst possible outcome and believe it's inevitable. I was doing it constantly. Every thought led to disaster. Every moment of silence felt like proof that my life was over. But here's the thing about catastrophizing, it's not reality. It's just fear wearing a disguise. And fear, I was about to learn, is not a reliable guide. One evening, on the 5th day of my self-imposed isolation, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were hollow. Her shoulders were slumped. She looked defeated. And in that moment, I realized something that stopped me cold. I hadn't been defeated by losing my job. I had been defeated by my own mind. I had given up before I'd even started fighting. The next morning, I did something that terrified me. I left my apartment. I didn't go to an interview. I didn't go to a networking event. I just walked. I walked through the streets of Chicago, past the coffee shops and the offices and the people who still had jobs. I walked until I found myself standing in front of the public library. I had walked past it 1,000 times, but I'd never gone inside. Something about the old building, the stone steps, the promise of quiet, it drew me in. And that decision, that small, spontaneous decision to step through those doors, would change everything. Because inside that library, I found something I wasn't looking for. Someone who would see me in a way I'd never been seen before. Someone who was about to turn my life upside down. The strange comfort of the library. What if the place you least expected to find peace becomes the place that saves you? What if the building you've walked past 1,000 times without a second glance holds the key to everything you've been missing? That's what I discovered when I stepped through the doors of the Chicago Public Library on that gray Thursday morning. The smell hit me first, old paper, dust, and something indefinably comforting. The silence was different from the silence in my apartment. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of stories, full of voices, full of lives that had been lived and recorded and preserved. I felt something loosen in my chest, something I didn't even know was tight. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books I would never read, letting the quiet wash over me. And then I saw him. A man sitting in the corner, reading with an intensity that made me stop. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He was so absorbed in his book that he didn't notice me at first. But when he looked up, when his eyes met mine, something shifted. He smiled. Not a big smile, not a flirtatious smile. Just a small, gentle smile that said, "I see you." And for some reason, that simple acknowledgement made my eyes well up with tears. I had been invisible for so long, invisible at work, invisible in my apartment, invisible in the city I'd lived in for over a decade. And this stranger, this man I'd never met, was looking at me like I mattered. Like I existed. Like I was worthy of being seen. I quickly looked away, embarrassed, and found a seat on the other side of the room. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. The next day, I went back to the library. I told myself it was because I needed a quiet place to work on my resume. But I knew the truth. I wanted to see if he was there. He was. Same corner. Same book. Same gentle smile when he looked up and saw me. This time, he nodded. I nodded back. That was it. But it was enough. For the next week, we played this silent game, arriving at the library, taking our usual seats, exchanging small nods. It became a ritual. A lifeline. In the middle of my chaos, there was this small, quiet connection. It didn't solve anything. It didn't get me a job. But it made me feel human again. And that was everything. Psychologists talk about something called micro-moments of connection, small, fleeting interactions that can have a huge impact on our mental health. This man, this stranger, was giving me that without even knowing it. Just by being there. Just by seeing me. I started to wonder about him. Who was he? Why was he always at the library? What was he reading so intently? And why did he keep looking at me like he knew something I didn't? I was about to find out. And the answer would change everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and second chances. He wasn't what I expected. What if the person you've been secretly watching from across the room turns out to be nothing like you imagined? What if the story you've been telling yourself about who they are is completely wrong, and the truth is so much better than your imagination? That's what I discovered when I finally spoke to the man from the library. It happened on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after I'd first seen him. I was sitting in my usual spot, staring blankly at my laptop, when he walked over and sat down across from me. My heart stopped. "I hope you don't mind," he said, his voice warm and calm. "I've been watching you for weeks, and I couldn't help but notice that you look like you need someone to talk to." I wanted to be offended. I wanted to tell him I was fine. But I wasn't fine. And somehow, he knew that. "My name is Robert," he said, extending his hand. I took it. "I'm Sarah," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We talked for hours. It started with small talk, the weather, the library, books we'd read. But it quickly deepened. Robert asked me questions that made me think. Not the polite, surface-level questions people usually ask. Real questions. "What's the thing you're most afraid of right now?" he asked. And I told him. I told him about losing my job. I told him about the loneliness. I told him about the voice in my head that told me I was a failure. He listened without judgment, without pity. And then he told me something that took my breath away. "I know exactly how you feel," he said. "Because I've been there too. I lost my wife 5 years ago. I lost my business 4 years ago. I lost everything I thought mattered. And I spent 2 years feeling exactly the way you're feeling right now." Psychologists talk about the power of shared experience, the healing that comes from knowing you're not alone in your pain. I had been carrying my grief in isolation, believing that no one could possibly understand what I was going through. But Robert understood. He had been through his own version of hell. And he had come out the other side. "So how did you survive?" I asked, my voice cracking. "How did you keep going when everything felt hopeless?" He smiled, that same gentle smile I'd seen from across the room. "I stopped trying to be strong," he said. "I stopped pretending I was okay. I started letting people see me, really see me, and I realized that connection is what saves us. Not money. Not success. Not achievements. Just other people. Showing up. Being present. Being real." I had spent my entire adult life believing the opposite. I had believed that independence was strength. That needing others was weakness. That vulnerability was dangerous. But Robert was showing me a different way. He was showing me that the thing I'd been running from, connection, was the very thing I needed most. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I started to see Robert differently. Not just as a kind stranger who'd saved me from loneliness, but as someone who might become something more. Something I wasn't ready to name yet. But something that felt like the beginning of everything I'd been missing. And when he invited me to meet him again, same time, same place, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Because for the first time in months, I felt hope. Why he kept coming back. What if the person who keeps showing up for you has a reason you never expected? What if their presence in your life isn't accidental, but intentional, driven by something deeper than you could possibly imagine? That was the question that consumed me in the weeks after Robert and I started meeting regularly. Every Tuesday and Thursday, without fail, he would be sitting in his corner of the library. And every time I walked through those doors, he would look up and smile, that same gentle, knowing smile that made my heart do something it hadn't done in years. I told myself it was just friendship. I told myself he was just being kind. I told myself I was reading too much into it. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. I couldn't stop wondering why he kept coming back. And I couldn't stop hoping that maybe, just maybe, his reasons were the same as mine. We started going for walks after our library sessions. Through the park, along the lake, past the coffee shops and the bookstores and the places that made Chicago feel like home. He talked about his wife, the woman he'd lost 5 years ago. He talked about their life together, their dreams, the emptiness he'd felt after she was gone. He talked about his business, the one he'd lost, and the shame that had come with that failure. And as he talked, I started to see a man I hadn't expected. A man who had been through the fire and emerged stronger. A man who had learned to be vulnerable. A man who had stopped running from his pain and started embracing it. He was everything I wasn't. Everything I wanted to become. Psychologists talk about something called emotional resonance, the way our feelings can sync up with someone else's, creating a deep, unspoken connection. I felt that with Robert. Every time I was near him, I felt calmer. More grounded. More myself. He didn't try to fix me or save me. He didn't offer solutions or easy answers. He just sat with me in my pain, his presence a quiet reassurance that I wasn't alone. And in that space, something started to heal. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But slowly, like a wound that finally begins to close. I started to laugh again. I started to hope again. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, my life wasn't over. It was just beginning. But I still had questions. Why was Robert so invested in me? Why did he keep showing up? What did he see in me that made him want to spend his time with someone who had nothing to offer? One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the lake, I finally asked him, "Why do you keep coming back?" I said, my voice hesitant. "You could be spending your time with anyone. Why me?" Robert was quiet for a long moment. And then he turned to me, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite name. "Because," he said, "I see something in you that you can't see in yourself. I see potential. I see strength. I see a woman who's been knocked down but isn't broken. And I want to be there when she stands back up." I felt tears welling in my eyes. No one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever seen me that way. And in that moment, I realized that Robert wasn't just a friend. He was something else entirely. Something I wasn't ready to name. But something that felt like the beginning of everything I'd been waiting for. The secret he was hiding. What if the person who seems to have it all together is actually carrying a pain so deep that it's shaped everything about who they are? What if the kindness they show you comes from a place of loss so profound that you can't even imagine it? That's what I discovered about Robert one evening when our walks took us somewhere unexpected. We had been meeting for almost 2 months, and I thought I knew him. I thought I understood his story, the loss of his wife, the collapse of his business, the years of rebuilding. But I was wrong. There was something he hadn't told me. Something he'd been carrying alone. And when he finally shared it, everything I thought I knew about him shifted. It happened on a cool autumn evening. We were walking along the lake, the water dark and still, when Robert stopped and turned to me. His face was different, more serious, more vulnerable. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." My heart started racing. What could it be? Was he married? Was he sick? Was he somehow involved in my losing my job? 1,000 terrible possibilities flashed through my mind. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he said slowly. "But I didn't tell you the whole story. She didn't just die. She took her own life. And for years, I blamed myself. I thought I could have saved her. I thought I should have seen the signs. I carried that guilt with me everywhere, and it nearly destroyed me." I stood there, frozen, unable to process what he was telling me. The man who had been my rock, my anchor, my reason to hope, he had been carrying this weight alone. All this time. All those gentle smiles and kind words, and beneath them, a grief so immense I couldn't fathom it. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He looked at me, his eyes glistening. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid you'd think I was broken. Afraid you'd walk away." I reached out and took his hand. "Robert," I said, "I'm not going anywhere. If anything, this makes me understand you more. You've been through something unimaginable, and you still found a way to show up for me. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." Psychologists talk about something called the power of shared vulnerability, how revealing our deepest wounds can actually strengthen connection, instead of weakening it. In that moment, standing by the lake with Robert, I felt closer to him than I'd ever felt to anyone. Not because he was perfect, but because he was real. Because he trusted me with his pain. Because he let me see the parts of him he'd been hiding for years. And in doing so, he gave me permission to do the same. I realized that the secret he'd been hiding wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was the very thing that made him human. And it was the very thing that made me love him. Not in spite of his pain, but because of it. I hadn't said the word love yet. I wasn't ready. But standing there, holding his hand, I knew it was true. I was falling in love with Robert. And nothing was ever going to be the same. The moment I almost gave up. What if the person who's been your anchor, your hope, your reason to believe, suddenly becomes the reason you want to run away? What if the very thing that saved you starts to feel like the thing that could destroy you? That's what happened to me after Robert shared his secret. I thought knowing his pain would bring us closer. And it did, for a while. But then something shifted. The more I learned about his loss, the more I started to doubt myself. How could I, a woman who couldn't even hold on to a job, be enough for someone who had been through so much? How could I offer him anything when I had nothing to give? The voice in my head, the one I'd been fighting for months, came roaring back. Louder than ever. more vicious than ever. You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. He's going to realize that eventually. It's better to leave now than to be left later. I started pulling away. I made excuses not to meet him. I didn't answer his calls. I told myself I was protecting him from me. I told myself I was doing the right thing. But the truth was simpler and more painful. I was terrified. Terrified of being vulnerable. Terrified of being seen. Terrified of letting someone in, only to have them leave. Robert had already lost so much. I couldn't bear the thought of being another loss in his life. I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing him. And I couldn't bear the thought of being hurt again. So I did what I always did when things got hard. I ran. I retreated back into my cocoon of loneliness, where it was safe. Where I couldn't be rejected. Where I couldn't fail. It was easier to be alone. Easier to be numb. Easier to pretend I didn't need anyone. Psychologists talk about something called the fear of intimacy, the anxiety that arises when we get too close to someone, triggering our deepest insecurities. I had this in spades. Every time Robert got closer, I pushed him away. Every time he showed me kindness, I questioned it. Every time he said something loving, I convinced myself it was pity. I was so used to being alone, so used to protecting myself, that I didn't know how to let someone in. And the irony was, the more I pushed Robert away, the more he tried to reach me. He called. He texted. He showed up at my apartment, unannounced, with flowers and a look of such genuine concern that I almost broke. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice steady but pained. "Why are you shutting me out?" I couldn't answer. I didn't know how to explain the chaos inside me. And then he said something that changed everything. "Sarah, I've lost people before. I know what loss feels like. And I'm not afraid of losing you, because I'm not going to lose you. You can push me away as many times as you need to. I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, I realized something I'd never understood before. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about being persistent. It's about showing up, even when the other person is running away. It's about choosing someone, over and over again, even when they're making it impossible. Robert wasn't going to leave me, no matter how hard I tried to make him. And that was both terrifying and liberating. I started to cry, not sad tears, but tears of relief. Because for the first time in my life, I believed that someone would stay. Someone would fight for me. Someone would love me, even when I was unlovable. And that belief was the beginning of everything. The unexpected proposal. What if the person who's been your anchor, your hope, your reason to believe, suddenly offers you something you never expected? What if the love you've been afraid to accept comes with something even more precious, a chance to rebuild your life? That's what Robert did on a chilly Saturday morning, about a month after I'd almost pushed him away. We were sitting in our usual spot at the library, the same corner, the same quiet, the same comfortable silence. And then Robert reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. "I've been working on something," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. And I want to show you. I opened the folder and found a business plan. A detailed, professional, beautifully crafted business plan. For a small publishing company. And at the top of the first page, in bold letters, was my name. Sarah's Stories. I stared at the pages, unable to process what I was seeing. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been thinking, Robert said slowly. You're a writer. You've always been a writer. You just forgot that because you were too busy being a marketer. I want to start a publishing company, small, independent, focused on giving voice to people who've been silenced. And I want you to be my partner. Not just as an employee. As an owner. As the creative force. As the person who makes it beautiful. I was speechless. I had been so focused on finding another job, on proving that I was still valuable. On fitting back into the box I'd been forced out of, that I had completely forgotten about my true passion. Writing. I had loved it once. I had dreamed of it once. But somewhere along the way, I'd buried that dream under the weight of practicality. Psychologists talk about something called the path of least resistance, the tendency to choose what's easy over what's meaningful. I had done that. I had chosen marketing because it was practical. I had chosen stability because it was safe. But Robert was offering me something different. He was offering me the chance to do what I actually loved. He was offering me a partnership, not just in business, but in life. I know it's a lot, he said, misinterpreting my silence. I know you might not be ready. But I believe in you, Sarah. I believe in you more than you believe in yourself. And I want to help you see what I see. I felt tears streaming down my face. No one had ever believed in me like this. No one had ever seen my potential so clearly. No one had ever offered me something so precious. I had spent my whole life trying to prove myself, trying to be enough, trying to deserve love. And here was someone who didn't need me to prove anything. He already believed. I thought about everything I'd been through, the job loss, the loneliness, the fear. I thought about how far I'd come. And I thought about Robert, this man who had lost so much, yet still found a way to give. He was offering me a future. Not a perfect future. Not an easy future. But a future that was mine. A future that was ours. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would stop running. I would stop hiding. I would stop letting fear control my life. I would say yes. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. I don't know if I'm capable. But I want to try. With you. Robert smiled, that same gentle smile that had changed everything. That's all I needed to hear, he said. And in that moment, everything changed. I didn't just have a job. I had a purpose. I didn't just have a partner. I had a future. And for the first time in my life, I believed that everything was going to be okay. Building a new life together. What if the life you thought was over is actually just beginning? What if everything you lost, your job, your identity, your sense of purpose, was just clearing the way for something better? Something you never could have planned or predicted? That's what I discovered as Robert and I started building our publishing company together. It wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights and endless meetings and moments when I was so overwhelmed I wanted to quit. But there were also moments of pure joy, the first book we published, the first author we helped. The first time I held our work in my hands and realized we'd created something real. Something meaningful. Something that mattered. I had spent my whole life working for other people, building their dreams, making them successful. And now, for the first time, I was building something of my own. Something I believed in. Something that was mine. The business grew slowly. It was never going to be a giant corporation. We didn't want that. We wanted to be small, intentional, focused on stories that needed to be told. We published memoirs of people who'd survived trauma, poetry collections from voices that had been silenced. Novels from authors who'd been rejected by the mainstream. It was beautiful work. Hard work. But work that filled me with a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. And every day, I worked alongside Robert and my partner in every sense of the word. We were building a company together. We were building a life together. And somewhere in the middle of all that building, something shifted between us. The friendship deepened. The trust solidified. And the love I'd been so afraid of, became undeniable. Psychologists talk about something called post-traumatic growth, the idea that people can actually become stronger and more resilient after going through difficult experiences. I had experienced it. Robert had experienced it. And together, we were experiencing it again. Our losses had shaped us. Our grief had refined us. Our pain had made us more compassionate, more understanding, more capable of true connection. And that connection was the foundation of everything we were building. I remember one evening, sitting in our small office, surrounded by stacks of manuscripts and the smell of coffee, looking at Robert across the desk. He was reading a submission, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving slightly as he read. And I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. Not for what he'd given me, but for who he was. For the man who had seen me at my lowest and refused to give up on me. "Thank you," I said, my voice soft. He looked up, confused. "For what?" "For everything," I said. "For seeing me. For believing in me. For not leaving when I tried to push you away." He smiled, that gentle, knowing smile. "I told you," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm right where I'm supposed to be." And in that moment, I knew. I knew that the job loss, the loneliness, the fear, it had all been leading to this. It had all been clearing the way for something better. Something I never could have found if I hadn't lost everything first. And that realization, that loss can be a gift, was the most profound lesson of my life. But the final piece of the puzzle was still waiting for me. The piece that would make everything click into place. The piece that would show me that love doesn't just survive loss, it can flourish because of it. The final lesson: loss is not the end. What if everything you lost was actually preparing you for everything you were about to find? What if the job, the identity, the sense of security you thought you couldn't live without, was just clearing the way for something so much better that you couldn't have imagined it even if you tried? That's what I finally understood, sitting in our small office on a Friday afternoon, holding the first book we'd ever published. It wasn't a bestseller. It wasn't a literary masterpiece. But it was ours. And it represented everything I'd been through to get here. The job loss. The loneliness. The fear. The hope. The love. It was all in that book, not in the words on the pages, but in the journey that had led me to this moment. I looked across the desk at Robert, and I felt a gratitude so deep it almost hurt. He had seen me when I was invisible. He had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. He had loved me when I was unlovable. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the woman who defined herself by her job, who measured her worth by her paycheck, who believed that success was the only path to happiness. I barely recognized her anymore. Because I had learned something profound, that success isn't about what you have. It's about who you become. And I had become someone I was proud of. Not because of my achievements, but because of my courage. I had lost everything and survived. I had faced my deepest fears and come out the other side. I had learned to let someone in, even when every instinct told me to run. And in doing so, I had found something I didn't even know I was looking for, a love that didn't require me to be perfect. A love that saw me, accepted me, and chose me anyway. Psychologists talk about something called the paradox of loss, how losing something can sometimes open us up to receiving something greater. I had experienced this firsthand. I had lost my job. I had lost my identity. I had lost my sense of purpose. And in the process, I had found myself. I had found Robert. I had found a life that was richer, deeper, and more meaningful than anything I could have planned. The loss wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. And I realized that this is true for all of us. The things we fear most, failure, rejection, loss, are often the very things that lead us to where we're meant to be. We just can't see it until we're on the other side. So here's my final question for you. Not what if you lose everything? Because that's the wrong question. The real question is, what if losing everything is the only way to find everything? What if the job you lose, the relationship that ends, the dream that dies, what if it's all just making room for something better? Something you never would have found if you'd stayed in your comfort zone? Something you couldn't have imagined because it was so much bigger than anything you'd planned? I thought about Robert and the life we'd built together. I thought about the books we'd published and the stories we'd told. I thought about the love that had grown out of the ashes of our losses. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that everything had happened exactly as it was supposed to. Not because life is fair, but because life is generous. If you're brave enough to keep going. If you're brave enough to let go. If you're brave enough to believe that loss is not the end. It's the beginning. That's everything for today. I'll make more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe to see them.